How long can a monitor lose a cardiac signal before a patient pays the price? Caleb Morgan's voice carried across the launch auditorium just as the 40-foot display went flat. No waveform, no audible alarm, no warning banner. Yet inside the transparent test chamber, the perfused cardiac simulator was still generating a live electrical rhythm. Hundreds of employees from Whitmore Medical Technologies stared beneath the white stage lights. Reporters lowered their cameras. Champagne glasses stopped midway to smiling mouths. Behind the podium, a banner introduced the Sentinel Heart Cardiac Monitoring System as the safest platform the company had ever built. Caleb stepped toward the control console. "Stop the demonstration." Chief Operating Officer Richard Vance moved in front of him. "It's a telemetry glitch." The monitor lost the cardiac signal. For 11 seconds. 11 seconds is enough to delay treatment. Richard's smile remained polished for the audience, but his voice dropped. "You know what termination does to your benefits. Think carefully about your daughter before you turn this into a spectacle." Caleb went still. Beneath his shirt cuff, Sophie's old hospital wristband pressed against his skin. She had tied it around his wrist that morning and called it his good luck bracelet. Richard straightened and faced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption. One member of the engineering team has interfered with today's presentation." Claire Whitmore stood at center stage in a white blazer, watching Caleb instead of the screen. As CEO, she had been briefed that the launch was complete, the safety testing final, and every remaining concern resolved. Caleb did not look like a man celebrating sabotage. He looked like a man watching a disaster arrive early. Richard raised a tablet. Mr. Morgan accessed restricted files, copied proprietary data, and bypassed the approved review process. "I used my assigned credentials," Caleb said, "to obstruct a launch, to document a failure." Richard glanced toward security. Two officers approached. Claire lifted one hand. "What failure?" Caleb looked directly at her. The monitor displayed false asystole and failed to trigger an alarm while the simulator was still producing a viable rhythm. Richard answered before Claire could. "The issue was reviewed and rejected." "By whom?" Claire asked. "The safety committee." Caleb's expression hardened. "I submitted 3 reports. Your electronic approval appears on all 3 rejection notices." Claire's posture changed. "I never reviewed those reports." Richard gave security a quiet nod. One officer reached for Caleb's arm. Caleb did not resist. He removed his badge and placed it on the edge of the stage. No shouting, no threats, only quiet dignity. "Your employment is terminated," Richard said. "Effective today." A murmur moved through the auditorium. Caleb turned toward the elevator, then stopped. "You should have checked who co-authored the Patient Protection Covenant." Richard laughed. Claire did not. The elevator doors closed around Caleb. No one in that room yet understood that he did not have the power to fire anyone. He had something more dangerous to people hiding the truth. He had the authority to trigger a review they could not control. By the time Caleb Morgan reached the hospital, the rain had soaked through the shoulders of his coat. He stood beneath the emergency entrance canopy holding a cardboard box filled with 12 years of work, a framed photograph, 2 engineering manuals, Sophie's painted coffee mug, and a brass nameplate that no longer belonged on his office door. His phone vibrated. Notice of employment termination. Company-sponsored health coverage would continue through the end of the month. After that, Caleb could elect COBRA continuation coverage, but the monthly premium listed beneath the notice was more than his rent. A second message followed from the hospital billing office. Sophie Morgan's procedure requires updated insurance authorization. Caleb read both messages twice. Then the automatic doors opened. "Daddy." Sophie hurried across the lobby in pink sneakers, her hospital bracelet loose around her wrist. At 10 years old, she had already learned how to smile while adults whispered near closed doors. Caleb lowered the box before she could see the company seal. "You're early," she said. "Meeting ended sooner than expected." "That never happens." He smiled, but his eyes did not. Sophie studied him with the careful attention of a child who had spent too much time around grief. "Did they listen to you?" Caleb looked toward the cardiac wing. A monitor beeped behind a curtain. Rubber saws whispered across polished tile. Somewhere down the hall, a child began to cry, and a mother answered with the soft voice people used when they were frightened too. "Not yet," he said. Sophie slipped her hand into his. At home that evening, their apartment felt smaller than usual. Rain tapped against the kitchen window while Caleb warmed tomato soup on the stove. Sophie worked on a math worksheet beside a stack of bills he had tried to hide beneath a grocery circular. The apartment carried the history of a life repaired instead of replaced. One chair had a metal brace beneath the seat. The refrigerator handle was wrapped in gray tape. A photograph of Rebecca Morgan rested above the sink, taken years before hospitals and alarms became part of the family vocabulary. Sophie looked toward the cardboard box. "Why is your office stuff here?" Caleb stirred the soup slowly. "They let me go." "Because of the machine?" "Yes." "Does that mean my surgery is canceled?" He turned off the burner. No, it was not yet true, but it was the promise he intended to make true. "The hospital needs new paperwork," he continued. "I'll handle it." Sophie lowered her pencil. "Were you scared when you stopped the launch?" "Yes." "Then why did you do it?" Caleb sat across from her. "Because being afraid doesn't make the danger less real." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded card. "My dad fixes things that scare people." Caleb pressed his thumb against the paper. He had lost his job. He had 30 days before their insurance changed. And he had just enough time to stop another family from trusting a monitor that could fail without warning. The night was not over. Neither was the truth. Why would a saboteur leave a complete audit trail? Claire Whitmore asked the question at 12:17 a.m., alone in the executive conference room. The building had emptied hours earlier, but the 42nd floor still glowed beneath rows of fluorescent lights. Rain pressed against the glass. Far below, Chicago traffic moved through the darkness in thin red lines. Caleb Morgan's termination file lay open before her. Unauthorized access. Copied data. Delayed certification. Threatening conduct. The evidence looked complete. Too complete. Claire turned another page. Caleb's credentials appeared on every warning, every anomaly report, every request for review. He had not hidden his actions. He had documented them carefully, sent them through approved channels, and copied the safety archive exactly as company policy required. That was not how sabotage usually looked. She called outside counsel first. "Preserve every log connected to Sentinel Heart," she said. "Do not notify internal legal." Then she called the chair of the board's audit committee. "I may have an authorization breach." "What kind?" "Someone may have used my electronic signature." Claire revoked her executive token, ordered the security team to preserve access records, and sent a copy of Caleb's file to an independent server. Only then did she call Richard. "It's after midnight," he said. "Where are Caleb Morgan's original reports?" "We covered this." "That wasn't my question." A pause. "They were rejected." "By whom?" "The safety committee." "Send me the complete reports and the approval history. I'll have legal prepare a summary." "I did not ask for a summary." Richard exhaled. "You're letting Morgan manipulate you." Claire looked through the glass wall toward the dark auditorium. "No, I'm checking whether someone manipulated my authority." She ended the call. 10 minutes later, she entered the testing laboratory with Nora Bennett, a junior biomedical systems engineer who had agreed to meet only after Claire confirmed that outside counsel had preserved the system. The room smelled of warm circuitry and stale coffee. The cardiac simulator sat beneath a white cover. Claire removed it. Behind the rear access panel, a strip of yellow paper had been taped beside the telemetry module. 11 seconds is long enough to delay a code. "You found it," Nora said. Claire turned. "Tell me what happened." Caleb submitted 3 safety reports. "I never received them." "I know." Nora opened an audit log. 3 rejected reports appeared. Each carried Claire's electronic approval. Each had been processed while Claire was attending an investor conference in Boston. Her stomach tightened. "Who used my token?" The session originated from Mr. Vance's executive network. Claire stared at the screen. Someone had not merely hidden information from her. Someone had been making decisions under her authority. "Who else knows?" she asked. "Caleb. Maybe one person in compliance." "And the raw test data?" Nora held up a small encrypted drive. "Still intact." Claire looked at the dark monitor. For years, she had believed control meant knowing who reported to her. That night, she learned the harder truth. A title meant nothing if other people could use it to bury what she had never been allowed to see. "You promised you would never call this number." Evelyn Whitmore's voice was older than Caleb remembered, but it still carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without raising it. Caleb stood beneath the hospital awning while rain struck the metal roof above him. Sophie's insurance notice glowed on his phone. "I remember," he said. You said you would call only if the patient protection covenant had been breached. It has. Ambulance lights washed the pavement red and blue. Through the sliding glass doors, Sophie sat near the admissions desk, drawing on the back of an appointment form. Evelyn lowered her voice. Tell me exactly what happened. They launched Sentinel Heart with a known telemetry defect. Under a specific interference pattern, the monitor can display false asystole and fail to trigger an alarm. How long? 11 seconds. And the reports? 3 submissions. All rejected under Claire's electronic approval. Does Claire know? I don't know what she knew before tonight. Caleb watched a frightened family enter the emergency department. Evelyn continued. The Whitmore Voting Trust can compel an emergency board session, preserve company records, and suspend access for officers named in a credible safety complaint. It cannot fire anyone without a board vote. I know. And the independent review will include you. It should. What evidence do you have? Original test files, audit logs, and the covenant trigger record. A pause followed. Years earlier, the Whitmore family had created the voting trust after the company's first major safety failure. It controlled a majority of voting shares and could require the independent directors to act when patient risk and executive conflict overlapped. Caleb had never been given the power to punish anyone. He had been given the right to force the truth into the room. Evelyn spoke again. If I initiate the trigger, the first step is automatic legal preservation. Access for the named officers will be temporarily suspended. The audit committee will meet within 30 minutes. Any decision on suspension or termination will require independent board approval. That's what I'm asking for. Who should be named? Everyone who approved, altered, or concealed the safety record. Richard? Yes. The lawyers? If the logs support it. Claire? Caleb looked through the glass at Sophie. If the evidence supports it. And you? Yes. Evelyn went quiet. What do you want from this, Caleb? He thought of Rebecca. Of Sophie. Of 11 seconds no family should ever have to understand. Protect the patients. That is not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Evelyn inhaled slowly. Say the words. Caleb closed his eyes for one moment. Trigger the emergency review. Remove every potentially compromised officer from access until the independent board decides. Everyone, including me. Silence filled the line. Then Evelyn answered. The preservation order will activate in 5 minutes. The board will convene in 30. The call ended. Caleb put the phone away and walked back toward his daughter. Across the city, no one was about to be fired by magic. But data was about to be locked. Authority was about to be questioned. And the people who had mistaken Caleb's restraint for weakness were about to face a process they could no longer control. 5 minutes after Caleb Morgan ended the call, Richard Vance's executive badge flashed red. He tried it again. Red. What is this? The reader answered with a dull electronic buzz. Across the 42nd floor, several other access points locked at the same time. Computers belonging to officers named in the emergency trigger displayed a preservation notice. Access temporarily suspended pending independent review. Company email remained available in read-only mode. External deletion privileges were revoked. The Sentinel Heart data archive moved under legal hold. Richard stormed toward the open workspace. Call IT. They can't restore executive access, his assistant said. The order came through the board's independent security protocol. Call Claire. She's with outside counsel. The main screen refreshed. By order of the Whitmore Voting Trust, the audit committee would convene in 25 minutes. Officers connected to the safety complaint were temporarily restricted from accessing product records until the board could determine whether formal suspension was necessary. The national launch was paused. The merger was not yet canceled, but outside counsel had advised the board to freeze all transaction activity until the safety allegations were reviewed. For a company built on constant motion, the stillness felt unnatural. Rain whispered against the windows. Fluorescent lights hummed above abandoned champagne glasses. A printer near reception fed out page after page of document retention instructions. Claire Whitmore stepped from the elevator with Nora Bennett and an attorney from the board's outside firm. Richard moved toward her. This is Morgan. This is a governance trigger, Claire said. He is retaliating because we fired him. The attorney handed Claire a sealed notice. The trigger includes every person connected to the approval chain. The main display showed the preliminary review list. Richard Vance. Harold Pierce. 3 corporate attorneys. 2 engineering directors. Claire Whitmore. Caleb Morgan. A murmur moved across the floor. Richard stared at Claire's name. He included you. He included himself too, Nora said. Richard gave a short, bitter laugh. It's theater. No, the outside attorney replied. It is how the covenant was designed. The complainant cannot exclude himself from review. That detail changed the room. A man seeking revenge would have protected his own position. Caleb had surrendered his access with everyone else. The elevators chimed again. 2 digital forensic specialists entered with sealed equipment cases. They had not been summoned 5 minutes earlier. Evelyn had placed them on standby weeks before, after receiving an initial confidential warning that the Sentinel archive might be compromised. Richard looked toward the investigators. You cannot freeze this company over one disgruntled engineer. The attorney met his eyes. The company is not frozen. The evidence is preserved. At the hospital, Caleb sat beside Sophie while she colored a paper heart blue. He had not called reporters. He had not demanded money. He had not asked for his job back. He had triggered a process that required the same rules to apply to everyone, including himself. Back at Whitmore Medical Technologies, Richard's badge slipped from his hand and struck the marble floor. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. Because justice had not entered the building as a command. It had entered as a standard no one could escape. The first patient connected to this defect had Caleb Morgan's last name. Nora Bennett placed an encrypted archive drive on the steel table. Claire Whitmore stared at it. What are you saying? The current Sentinel platform reused a telemetry module from an earlier hospital pilot. The secured records room sat beneath the research wing, far from the glass offices above. Backup servers hummed behind locked cages. 2 representatives from outside counsel stood near the door, documenting every step. Claire inserted the drive into an isolated computer. A row of folders appeared. Pilot testing. Signal interruptions. Corrective action reports. Patient incidents. One file carried a red classification banner. Incident 0147. Claire opened it. Grainy hospital footage filled the screen. A woman lay beneath white sheets while a nurse adjusted in 4-line. The cardiac monitor displayed false asystole. But the patient was still breathing. No alarm sounded. 11 seconds passed before the signal returned. By then, her condition had deteriorated. Claire leaned toward the screen. Who was she? Nora lowered her eyes. Rebecca Morgan. The name seemed to pull the air from the room. Claire opened the record. 34 years old. Wife of Caleb Morgan. Mother of Sophie Morgan. The official review had attributed the event to a loose external sensor and an unrelated cardiac complication. But the archived engineering notes told a different story. The telemetry module had dropped a valid signal during electromagnetic interference. The failure had not been proven as the sole cause of Rebecca's death, but it had delayed recognition of her worsening rhythm. Claire looked toward the attorney. Was this reported? The hospital reported the event, he said. The device malfunction was classified as user error after Whitmore submitted a corrective summary. Nora opened the audit trail. Richard Vance had approved the summary. 2 attorneys had revised the language. A senior engineering director had closed the root cause investigation. Claire stared at the date. 6 years ago. Caleb did not know Richard had directed the classification, Nora said. Not then. What did he know? That the device had failed. Your father asked him to join the company and help redesign the safety architecture. Another file opened. A letter from Daniel Whitmore appeared on the screen. Caleb, we cannot undo what happened to Rebecca, but we can determine whether the system failed and make certain the next version does not repeat it. Claire read the line twice. Why did Caleb stay? He believed the original module had been retired. And it wasn't. Richard's team reused part of the architecture in Sentinel Heart. Caleb discovered the connection only during final validation. That made the 6 years suddenly make sense. Caleb had not spent 6 years knowingly allowing patients to remain at risk. He had spent 6 years believing the failure had been contained. Then the same signature appeared again. The same interference pattern. The same 11 seconds. Claire stepped away from the screen. He could have gone public after Rebecca died. He had suspicion, not proof. He could go public now. He wants evidence strong enough that no one can dismiss it as grief. The room fell silent. Caleb had not joined Whitmore Medical Technologies to destroy the company. He had joined to fix the system that failed his wife. And when he discovered the failure had been rebuilt under a new name, he chose patient safety over his job, his benefits, and the last fragile piece of trust he had left. Put my father's chair at the head of the table. Claire Whitmore's request stopped the emergency board hearing before it began. Around the glass conference room, independent directors reviewed sealed evidence packets. Outside counsel sat beside Caleb Morgan, who had accepted representation from a whistleblower attorney before entering the room. Rain pressed against the windows. At the center of the room stood one empty space. A dark walnut chair no one had used since Daniel Whitmore died. Richard Vance gave a dry laugh. This is sentimental theater. No, Claire said. It is a reminder of why the covenant exists. Caleb sat at the far end of the table. No polished statement. No performance. Only a worn charcoal jacket, quiet eyes, and Sophie's hospital wristband beneath his cuff. Richard leaned back. There he is. The engineer who shut down $1 billion launch because he could not accept termination. Caleb's attorney began to object. Caleb lifted one hand. I did not shut down the company. You froze the merger. The audit committee paused the transaction. You removed executive access. The covenant triggered temporary restrictions until this board could review the evidence. Richard turned toward the directors. He admits he started it. The doors opened. Evelyn Whitmore entered carrying a leather folder bearing the seal of the Whitmore Voting Trust. At 78, she moved slowly, but no one mistook slowness for weakness. She placed the folder before the empty chair. The patient protection covenant was adopted into the company bylaws after the first major safety failure, she said. The Whitmore Voting Trust controls 53% of voting shares and may compel an emergency board review when patient risk and executive conflict overlap. Richard folded his arms. What does that have to do with Morgan? Evelyn opened the document. Caleb Morgan co-authored the covenant with my son. The room quieted. He holds no executive office, she continued. He owns no controlling shares. He cannot fire anyone. He cannot seize company accounts. Richard smiled. Then he has no authority here. He has one protected authority, Evelyn said. As independent patient safety custodian, he may submit a documented emergency trigger. Once validated, the trigger requires data preservation, temporary access restrictions, and review by independent directors. A board member looked toward Caleb. So he did not suspend us. No, Evelyn said. The bylaws required us to decide whether suspension was warranted. Richard reached for a tablet. I have video proving Morgan threatened the company. The edited recording played. Caleb's warning about the safety reports remained. Richard's reference to Sophie's benefits did not. Claire looked toward outside counsel. Play the preserved original. The full audio filled the room. You know what termination does to your benefits. Think carefully about your daughter before you turn this into a spectacle. No one moved. Richard's confidence thinned. Caleb spoke at last. I did not trigger the covenant because I was fired. His voice remained low. I triggered it because the monitor repeated the same failure pattern connected to my wife's death. Rain touched the windows. Caleb looked toward the empty chair. I asked for the evidence to judge everyone by the same rule. The boardroom fell silent. For years, power had spoken first in that room. That morning, truth finally had a seat at the table. I am not asking this board to protect me. Claire Whitmore stood beside her father's empty chair while the independent directors reviewed the final evidence summary. Richard Vance sat across from her with counsel at his side. His executive access had already been suspended by unanimous board vote. The merger remained paused. The Sentinel Heart launch had been canceled pending regulatory review. Outside, rain streaked the windows. Claire removed the silver CEO pin from her lapel and placed it on the table. My electronic signature was used without authorization, she said. But I also failed to build a system that would have alerted me sooner. I trusted summaries instead of evidence. Richard leaned toward the board. She is overreacting. Claire looked at him. You concealed 3 safety reports. You cannot prove I ordered that. Outside counsel placed a printed audit trail on the table. We can. Richard's attorney whispered something to him. He ignored it. If this becomes public, Richard said, contracts will collapse. Hospitals will walk. Thousands of employees may lose their jobs. The argument carried weight because part of it was true. Power often protected itself by placing innocent people between misconduct and accountability. Richard turned toward Claire. Blame Morgan. Say grief impaired his judgment. Resolve the defect privately. Protect the company. Caleb sat beside his attorney. He did not interrupt. He watched Claire make the choice no one else could make for her. She turned toward the board chair. I move that Richard Vance, Harold Pierce, and every officer shown to have falsified or concealed patient safety records be terminated for cause, subject to final documentation by counsel. The chair called for a vote. The motion passed unanimously. Richard pushed back from the table. You think this makes you righteous? No, Claire said. The evidence makes you responsible. At that moment, one of the forensic specialists entered. We detected a scheduled remote purge against the legacy archive. Richard froze. Scheduled when? The board chair asked. 3 days ago. It was set to execute if Mr. Vance's access status changed. The specialist placed a report on the table. The purge failed. Mr. Morgan mirrored the archive to the Covenant's independent escrow server during final validation. Richard looked at Caleb. You planned this. I preserved the evidence, Caleb said. You assumed I would destroy it. I prepared for the possibility. Security officers approached Richard only after the board secretary confirmed the termination vote. No shouting followed. No applause. Justice was not a celebration. It was a burden, finally placed where it belonged. Claire faced the board again. My second motion is that I step aside as CEO during the independent investigation. A murmur moved through the room. The chair looked at her. You understand that the board may not restore you. Yes. And that an outside compliance officer will report directly to us if you return. Yes. The motion passed. Only then did Claire turn toward Caleb. Your trigger included your own conduct. It had to. Why? Because justice becomes revenge when the person demanding it refuses to be judged by the same rules. Claire lowered her eyes. For years, she had believed leadership meant standing above consequences. Caleb had shown her something harder. Leadership meant entering them first. A company does not earn trust by surviving a scandal. It earns trust by changing what allowed the scandal to happen. Claire Whitmore stood inside the reopened auditorium 9 months later. There were no champagne towers. No launch countdown. No giant promises projected above the stage. Behind her, the redesigned Sentinel heart monitor traced a steady green rhythm across the screen. A biomedical engineer introduced a controlled interference test. The signal weakened. A warning appeared immediately. An alarm sounded. The system failed safely. Caleb Morgan stood near the side aisle with Sophie's hand wrapped around his fingers. Her surgery had been completed after the hospital approved a temporary financial assistance plan, while Caleb transitioned to COBRA coverage. The procedure had gone well. The color had returned to her cheeks, and beneath her blue dress, a healing scar marked the second chance she had almost lost. The investigation cleared Caleb of wrongdoing. It found that Claire had not participated in the fraud, but it criticized her oversight and the concentration of authority beneath her office. Shareholders approved a restructured board. The audit committee gained independent authority. A new chief compliance officer reported directly to the directors. The safety division was removed from the CEO's control. Only after those reforms, and a public vote of the new board, was Claire allowed to return as chief executive. Richard Vance and 2 senior officers were charged after federal investigators reviewed the falsified records and obstruction evidence. Civil cases remained unresolved. Caleb never celebrated their fall. Justice, he believed, was not measured by how loudly guilty people suffered. It was measured by how safely innocent people could live afterward. Claire turned toward him. Caleb Morgan reminded this company that patient safety cannot depend on permission from the people who profit from silence. The audience rose. Sophie tugged his sleeve. Go up there, Dad. Caleb smiled. This belongs to more than me. He motioned toward Nora Bennett, the independent engineers, the nurses, the investigators, and the families who had testified. The applause shifted toward them. Caleb remained beside his daughter. He had never wanted a spotlight. He wanted a system that listened before another family stood beside an empty hospital bed. Claire had once offered to cover Sophie's expenses privately. Caleb declined. Build something every family can use. So the Whitmore Foundation created the Rebecca Morgan Cardiac Access Fund, available to qualifying families regardless of where they receive treatment. Not a private favor. Grace extended beyond one household. That evening, Claire arrived at Caleb's apartment carrying an apple pie and no business papers. Sophie opened the door. You came alone. I thought I should. Did you bring dessert? Claire lifted the box. Sophie stepped aside. Then you can stay for dinner. The meal was simple. Soup, warm bread, 3 mismatched plates. On the refrigerator hung Sophie's newest drawing. It showed Caleb, Claire, and herself standing beneath a large blue heart. Across the top, she had written, "The people who told the truth." Claire read it quietly. Caleb placed a cup of coffee beside her. Nothing between them was rushed. There was no promise of romance. Only respect, trust beginning carefully, and the possibility that Grace might someday become something more. Outside, rain softened against the windows. Months earlier, one phone call had forced an empire to stop. But Caleb's greatest victory was not that powerful people lost their offices. It was that employees gained a protected voice. Families gained the truth. And Sophie learned that dignity does not need to shout. Justice does not require revenge. And sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who has every reason to destroy it, yet chooses instead to make it safer for everyone who comes after him.